The trip you're about to see was a father-daughter vacation with Elizabeth, my 12-year-old. It started with an invitation from friends from the Beach Talk pilot community. They had invited pilots to spend a weekend with them in Cascade, Idaho, with a big pig roast to feed everyone. Beach Talk is an online message board, and this weekend in Idaho would offer a chance to meet many people in person that so far I knew by name but had not yet met face to face. Now, Cascade, Idaho is over 1,000 miles away from my home in Iowa, and right away I started to wonder what else I would want to do on this trip to make it worthwhile. From Cascade, it's not that much further to the west coast, so I wanted to add San Francisco to the trip after the weekend in Idaho, an easy 3.5-hour flight in the Bonanza. The leg from Iowa to Idaho was much too long for a non-stop flight though. I'm new to mountain flying, and one of the self-imposed rules for this trip in my normally aspirated Bonanza was to not fly over the mountains in the afternoon, to avoid the worst of the thermals and turbulence. I figured Rapid City in South Dakota would make a nice first stop on the way out west. The terrain rises a little bit between Iowa and Rapid City, but it was only after Rapid City that the real mountains began. While a non-stop flight from Rapid City to Cascade was certainly possible, there's a phenomenal point of interest along the way, and it would be a shame not to stop there: Yellowstone National Park. We ended up spending 3 days there before continuing to Idaho. That defined the way all the way out to San Francisco. But what about the way back? Going directly from there to Iowa would take us over some of the highest terrain in the country and force us to deal with a lot of restricted airspace. It would be easier to head either north or south along the Pacific coast before returning eastbound. And while Portland and Seattle would have made nice destinations, I picked San Diego, California for this trip. From there, we would return back to Iowa with a quick overnight stop in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and a fuel stop in Garden City, Kansas. The whole trip was around 3,300 nautical miles long, or a bit over 6,000 kilometers. The actual distance flown was a bit longer, because I often deviated from the direct route due to airspace and terrain. Come along for this flight, and I'll explain how I picked the exact route for each leg. Our trip begins in early June of 2015 with a flight to Rapid City in South Dakota. I filed an IFR flight plan for this leg, which is what I normally do on cross-country flights here in the Midwest. However, for this flight there were a couple of reasons for filing a route other than direct. As you can see on the map, there are 2 military operations areas along the direct path, including the Lake Andes MOA with a floor of only 6,000 feet. But more importantly, radar coverage over South Dakota is spotty even at my planned cruise altitude of 8,000 feet. And without radar coverage, ATC cannot separate traffic unless that traffic is on airways. So I was looking for a route that is on airways for at least the western 1/3, where I expected radar coverage gaps, and that also stays clear of the Lake Andes MOA. This created a detour of 20 miles or about 8 minutes, using the O'Neill and Ainsworth VORs. You can see on the IFR en route chart how that keeps us on 2 airways, Victor 100 and Tango Route 288. Elizabeth was spending most of the flight watching movies on her laptop instead of looking outside, and I must admit there isn't a whole lot of breathtaking scenery on this route until we get to the Badlands National Park, where I got the camera out and took some pictures. Then, on approach to Rapid City, it got a little bumpy. The one big way to screw up would be to land at the wrong airport. As you can see here, Rapid City on the left isn't very far at all from Ellsworth Air Force Base at my 1 o'clock, where civilian bonanzas are less appreciated. There was a lot of construction around the FBO, which made it a little tricky to find our rental car, a Ford Expedition disguised as the compact car that I had reserved through Hertz. We only had the rest of this day and one night here in Rapid City before moving on to Yellowstone, so we drove straight to Mount Rushmore, which is without a doubt the best known attraction in the area. That night, we had dinner while watching soccer, the US women's team beating Australia in the US's first match of the tournament, not yet knowing that almost 4 weeks later we would watch the US team win the World Cup final. Today we'll see real mountains on the flight to Yellowstone Airport, located in West Yellowstone in Montana, just across the state border from Wyoming. After passing the Black Hills, we have to deal first with the Bighorn Mountains, with peaks of over 13,000 feet, and then with mountains almost everywhere around Yellowstone National Park. There are several good routes that avoid the highest terrain and offer good options for emergency landings. Here are 3 options that I had in mind for our trip. The first one, pretty close to the direct route, stays just south of the highest elevations of the Bighorns, and then follows a river valley from Cody, Wyoming to Yellowstone Lake. The second one goes to the north of the Bighorns and then almost to Billings, Montana, to approach Yellowstone through a wide valley north of the park. And the third route, the longest of the 3, goes to the southern tip of the Wind River Range and then follows the western side of that range to the northwest, towards Jackson Hole. I figured all 3 routes would be scenic, but this last one would offer especially nice views, including the Grand Tetons. Weather permitting, this is the route I wanted to fly, and the weather was cooperating very well that day. Speaking of the weather, it was almost perfect during the entire trip. Not once did I have to adjust our travel plans due to bad weather. On this day, the winds were under 5 knots both on the ground and at altitude. Visibility was unlimited, cloud bases were high, and a chance of thunderstorms was not expected until late in the afternoon, long after we completed the flight. After takeoff from Rapid City, we fly over the Black Hills and see Mount Rushmore again. The Black Hills look nice, but they're no match for what is to come. The Bighorns are visible from far away, and then we reach the Wind River Range. What a spectacular view. Here we gradually turn right and fly over a wide valley with the winds to the right and the Wyoming Range to the left. We're flying towards the city of Jackson Hole and Jackson Lake. We are at 12,500 feet, and the peaks of the majestic Grand Tetons to our left are even higher. Soon we reach the southwestern part of Yellowstone National Park. There is still snow on the ground. We can see famous landmarks from here, like Old Faithful and, my personal favorite, the Grand Prismatic Spring. In just a few minutes we reach the small town of West Yellowstone and its airport behind it. The city looks smaller than the airport, and it really isn't much more than a bunch of hotels, restaurants, and stores. The airport has a nice long and wide runway. It is completely closed in the winter months due to heavy snow, and the FBO is only staffed from June through September. We park next to a barn where we meet Troy and Tracy from San Diego unload their mountain bikes. Like us, they are beach talkers on the way to the big fly-in and pig roast in Idaho, where we'll see them again. After a quick lunch, we head into Yellowstone National Park. In the 2.5 days in the park, we see many of its famous attractions. Geysers, many geysers, from very small to very large, like Old Faithful. The famous Grand Prismatic Spring, even though it looked more spectacular from up high on our flight in. The park is huge, so a lot of time is spent driving around in the car, and occasionally there's something special to see that makes everyone stop, like these black bears. We saw more bears on a hike. Lots and lots of bison, of course, and a lot of stunning scenery. For an additional dose of fun, Elizabeth went ziplining, and we discovered a foosball table in the rec room of our motel. It was one foggy morning, but mostly the weather was beautiful, and we thoroughly enjoyed our stay here. Leg 3 of the big trip brings us from Yellowstone to the fly-in and pig roast in Idaho. It will be another day flying in the mountains with stunning scenery all around us. While pilots with more mountain flying experience might pick a route through the valleys close to the direct route, I wanted to make it easy and went a bit south to maximize the time and gliding distance to flat terrain. As you will see, the view of the mountains was still very nice. It's another day with very good weather. We leave from West Yellowstone around 9 o'clock on Friday morning. The temperature is already at 60 degrees Fahrenheit, which means the density altitude is over 8,000 feet. My airplane does not have a turbocharger, and despite proper leaning of the mixture for takeoff, it takes noticeably longer to accelerate and climb. I decide to fly a couple of circles around the airport to gain altitude before heading on course. As we start our descent, it gets bumpy, and there's more wind today too. Here you can see the place where we spent the weekend, a grass runway on the lake with a few nice cabins. However, we land in Cascade on a longer paved runway and park the airplane there for the weekend. It's early on Saturday, the sun is just coming up over the lake, and preparations for the pig roast begin. Lava rocks in a pit have been heated up with a fire. Now it's time to get the pig, put it on the lava rocks, and cover it with wet burlap. Then everything is sealed tightly to contain the heat and moisture.
Grab that shovel over there and start sealing it. And you said lava works best, huh? Yes.
The pig takes most of the day to cook, so we have some time to enjoy the beautiful day, to go for a walk, and prepare the house for the big meal. There's a lot of hangar talking, and it's a great opportunity to meet many people in person whose names I have seen on the Beach Talk message board. Tripp is giving a nice presentation on whiskeys.
What else has to happen? This is the guy that actually owns a whiskey company. So it has to be aged in new, short.
And of course it wouldn't be a fly-in if there wasn't an occasional airplane flying by.
I know there's a pig in there somewhere.
And then it's time to eat. The pig is taken over to a table and uncovered. With lots of hungry people waiting around him, Mike is cutting pieces of meat off that are then finished in the kitchen.
Oh, look at that. Wow.
After that, young and old visitors alike are enjoying a very nice meal. Not just pork, but fine cheeses and lots of side dishes that people had flown in from all over the country. Mike and Andrea, thank you so very much for your hospitality. We had a fantastic time, and without this event, the whole rest of our big summer trip wouldn't have happened either. The fly-in and pig roast are over, and like most others, we leave on Sunday morning. Our destination airport is San Francisco International, and while we could make it there non-stop, the FBO in San Francisco doesn't sell 100 low-lead. So with the next flight in mind, we plan to land at McClellan Field in Sacramento, California, fill the tanks there, and then fly the remaining short distance to SFO. This second leg to San Francisco will be on instrument flight plan, but we are VFR from Cascade to Sacramento. McClellan Field is a former Air Force base with a very long runway and a huge ramp, and the fuel is affordable here. Here's the flight plan to SFO. Flight time is just under 1 hour and will be at 8,000 feet. Our route of flight is the RISD 4 arrival, starting at the Sacramento VOR. Showing you just a few short views of the flight to San Francisco. This leg alone was a very interesting flight, arriving at such a large and busy airport, and you can find a much more detailed video of this flight in my YouTube channel, with all the air traffic control conversation.
San Francisco Tower, good afternoon. Bonanza 70 Tango Bravo, visual approach 28 right.
Bonanza 70 Tango Bravo, San Francisco Tower, good afternoon. Caution, white terminal 757, proceed edge. 737 ahead to your left of the parallel, 126, 18, runway 28 right, clear to land.
Clear to land, 28 right, Bonanza 70 Tango Bravo.
After 1 hour, we arrive at Signature, the FBO in San Francisco. We park the Bonanza and take a cab to a hotel downtown. This first afternoon, we do typical touristy stuff, walking around Chinatown and then slowly making our way to Fisherman's Wharf. Here, we visit the aquarium. I had given Elizabeth a travel guide and asked her to pick a place that she was interested in exploring in detail. She selected the San Francisco Botanical Garden, and we spent quite a bit of time here. The following morning, on the flight out, we'd see the downtown area from the air, but that is part of the next leg. San Diego is our next stop, but we take our time to get there. First, we'll take the scenic tour of San Francisco from the air. Then, we'll stop in Burbank, just north of Los Angeles, to visit Ernie, a friend and former co-worker who now lives there. We fly on Airways today. This will take us from San Francisco over Monterey, and from there more or less in a straight line to the Los Angeles area. After our stop in Burbank, the routing we get assigned is a so-called TEC route, Tower En Route Control. Burn 29 is the name of our route today, and that takes us to the eastern LA suburbs and then south to San Diego, where we will arrive at Montgomery Field, a popular general aviation airport in the area. By the time we take off from San Francisco, the low overcast from the early morning hours is gone, and the sky is mostly clear. This means we can ask air traffic control for a bay tour. We take off VFR and go north towards the Golden Gate Bridge. The bridge is still in clouds, but we can see numerous other landmarks: Sutro Tower, Alcatraz Island, the downtown area, and the Bay Bridge. Then we head south again, past San Francisco International Airport, towards Burbank. There's a separate video on my channel with all the details of the San Francisco departure, with all the ATC communications, in case you'd like to see that in more detail. Then we reach LA. Here you can see us crossing over the Van Nuys Airport, on final to runway 8 in Burbank. There's a little surprise waiting for us at the FBO in Burbank. 3 tilt rotors are parked on the ramp, as are 2 presidential helicopters, also known as Marine One when the president is on board. It's not every day I get to park the Bonanza next to Barack Obama's ride. And I feel that with all the guards walking around, this is probably the safest parking spot I've ever had for my airplane. My friend Ernie invited us to his house, where he showed us his homemade arcade. Ernie works for Disney Animation Studios, and he was able to give us a little tour of the place. This was a highlight for Elizabeth, who is quite an artist and who loved seeing lots and lots of artwork from Disney movies in the building. But we want to be in San Diego that evening, so we have to leave before too long. After takeoff from Burbank, we fly over the LA area for quite a while. It's a big place, no doubt. Later, we're flying over the mountains of Southern California. When we finally turn towards Montgomery Field, I will have to fly the first and only instrument approach of our 2-week trip. Because with the sun already low in front of us, I cannot see the field until we are almost there. Lots of airplanes are parked here on the ramp. Hertz screwed up our rental car reservation, but the nice lady at the FBO quickly arranges another car for us, and we are on our way to the hotel in the downtown area. That night, Elizabeth and I enjoy some great fish tacos. The next morning, still very early by Elizabeth's teenager standards, we drive to the San Diego Zoo. As before in San Francisco, I had asked Elizabeth to pick a special place that she was interested in and that she would want to spend some time at. In San Diego, that place was the zoo, and it was a great visit for both of us. After the zoo, we head out to the beach by Belmont Park. We don't have time to go for a swim, but we at least wanted to feel the sand and see the ocean. We ride the Giant Dipper, the famous wooden roller coaster right by the beach, and then we head back to downtown for our last dinner on the West Coast. Because tomorrow we start going home. After almost 2 weeks on the road, it is time to head back home. It's a long way, and we're doing this in 2 days. On Thursday, we fly from San Diego to Albuquerque, New Mexico. We spend the night here. On Friday, the plan is to leave early in the morning and fly to Cedar Rapids with a fuel stop in Garden City, Kansas. From Montgomery Field, we climb out to the northeast between 2 military areas and then towards Phoenix. We continue around the northern side of Phoenix and then proceed directly to Albuquerque. It's a VFR flight at an altitude of 13,500 feet. We arrive at Gibbs, the FBO at Montgomery Field, fairly early, hoping to fly before the thermals create too much bumpy air over the mountains. Apparently that was too early for Elizabeth, who once again demonstrated that a teenager can sleep anywhere, anytime, with the exception of bedtime, of course. We take off to the west and then turn northeast towards the mountains. Compared with Idaho and Wyoming earlier in this trip, I would say the flight today is less scenic. Our plan to avoid the bumps only works for a couple of hours. After that, we experience continuous moderate turbulence until landing in Albuquerque. It's a bit of a relief when after hours of seeing a lot of nothing, the city and airport come into view. On rollout, we see a couple of the big converted DC-10s on the left that are used to fight wildfires. They're based here in Albuquerque. Cutter is the FBO that had been recommended to me, so that's where we park. They help us with transportation to the nearby hotel, where Elizabeth is rejoined with civilization's most important asset, the internet. Later, we enjoy a fabulous Mexican dinner at El Pinto, a restaurant I had been to only once, around 10 years ago, and that I've been wanting to come back to ever since. The next morning, we have breakfast together, and then it is time for me to say goodbye to Elizabeth. Her mom is flying in from Cedar Rapids. We actually see her land here on Delta Airlines right now, and they will spend the next week in Arizona before I fly back to Albuquerque. But that's a different story. I see one of those DC-10 tankers take off, and then it's time to start the flight to Garden City. It is later in the day than I had hoped to take off, which means it's warmer, which in turn means the aircraft's takeoff and climb performance is not as good. The wind today doesn't help either, and so I take up a lot of runway and climb very slowly, despite the light weight of the aircraft. I follow Interstate 40 through a pass. From there, the route goes to Las Vegas, not the big Las Vegas in Nevada, but the one in New Mexico, and from there via Dalhart, Texas to Garden City. The weather is, yet again, excellent, with just an occasional shower developing in the distance. In Texas, the scenery changes significantly. Agriculture with center pivot irrigation is the dominant feature here and later in Kansas too. Here's our landing in Garden City. The nice little airport has a small but good restaurant in the terminal building, where I have a bite to eat while I watch passengers board a regional jet. I can't help but think how different their flying experience today is going to be from mine, and nothing would make me want to switch with them. After lunch, I take off from the same runway I landed on earlier. There is more of the same scenery as before. The filed route takes me directly to Cedar Rapids on the Great Circle Line, passing north of Kansas City and south of Omaha, then almost touching Des Moines before reaching my home in Cedar Rapids. Back in Iowa, there's farmland too, but it looks very different from Kansas. The air today is perfectly clear. The sun is already low behind me as I approach runway 9er in Cedar Rapids, and this makes my final landing of this trip look extra special. When I shut off the engine in front of my hangar, my precision flight log shows that I have added 29.4 hours to the hops meter on this trip. That's the total time the engine was running, including time on the ground. That is roughly equivalent to a dozen lunch or breakfast runs that we do here frequently in our airplanes, but how much more did we see on this big trip? As the fuel truck arrives, I inspect the airplane. Usually, I clean bugs off of the wings and windshield whenever I return from a trip. This trip was longer, and thus there are a lot more bugs than usual, bugs from no less than 13 states that we had flown over. I have a large map of the US in my hangar, and a pin marks every airport where I have landed in the Bonanza. Most of them are in the Midwest, naturally, with a few places in the southeast and on the east coast, but without much yet west of Iowa. But today I can add a few new places. Rapid City in South Dakota, West Yellowstone in Montana, Cascade in Idaho, Sacramento, San Francisco, Burbank and San Diego in California, Albuquerque in New Mexico, and Garden City in Kansas. Ever since, when I look at this map in my hangar and see the pins in the western US, I remember this awesome trip. It was special in many ways. My first flight over the Rocky Mountains, and also my first flight out to the West Coast. It was a chance to meet with many nice people, and it was a wonderful time with my little girl who's growing up so quickly. That's the end of this video, and if you're still with me, I can't help but think how each episode of Car Talk, my favorite radio show, ends. Well, it's happened again. You've wasted another perfectly good hour listening to me and watching one of my videos. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.